Welcome, everyone. Again, I'm Jay Becker, and I'm with the World Can't Wait Chicago chapter, which is a proud part of the coalition to shut down Guantanamo, which includes Witness Against Torture, White Rose Catholic Worker, the Illinois Coalition Against Torture, and the Chicago Committee to Free the Cuban Five. Many of those groups, and Amnesty International has also been very supportive of our work. Many of those groups and other endorsers of tonight's program have literature on the table right there as you came in, so I encourage everyone to check that out and become involved in whatever way you can. I want to start tonight as well by thanking CAN TV, which is here recording our event, and it will be up on their website, so we can share that with people who couldn't make it tonight, people who don't live in Chicago. The link will be up there. So to start out, let me introduce our speakers. To the far left, Dr. Antonio Martinez, who is a very socially conscious psychologist and a co-founder of the Kovler Center for Survivors of Torture. To my immediate left is Marc Falkoff, an attorney who represents 15 Guantanamo prisoners from Yemen, and Marc teaches law at Northern Illinois University in DeKalb. And only physically to my right is to my left. To my other left, yes, is Mario Venegas, who's a very active member of our coalition to shut down Guantanamo. We've frozen and drowned out on that corner for months. And he's also very active with Amnesty International. He himself is a survivor of torture under the Pinochet regime and speaks very eloquently about the impact of that shame of this country. We'll start with Marc Falkoff.
Thank you. Thank you, Jay. 15 minutes? I thought I had an hour. No, it's all right. Well, thank you for the invitation to speak, and thank you all for coming out. It's very important that you do, and it's much appreciated. I'm actually filling in for Candace Gorman, who's another one of the Gitmo habeas lawyers, and I'm going to do my best to fill her shoes, but she really is one of the hero lawyers of the Gitmo litigation. She has spent years at great personal cost prosecuting these cases on behalf of the detainees and fighting for the rule of law. So I just wanted to mention that. And it's also too bad that she's not here because she would undoubtedly be dressed in an orange jumpsuit to speak with you. But I've been a lawyer. I've been working on these cases since 2004. I represent 15 of the men at Guantanamo. They're entering their, some of them are home, a few of them are home, but most of them are entering their 13th year of detention. I think what I'll do is maybe spend my 15 minutes talking to you about what's gone on in the past year at Guantanamo, because in some ways it's a year that really, 2013 was a year that really started off low, one of the low points in the Guantanamo disaster, and we end the year with a glimmer of hope, I think. So when 2013 started, we really were at a low point. For the previous 5 years or so, we had been actively involved in litigating the habeas cases, giving the detainees the day in court that we had hoped they would actually have way back in 2004 when the Supreme Court first ruled that they had the right to go into the court and try to convince a neutral judge that they were not enemy combatants, that they were being detained illegally. The 5 years before that, we had spent in legal wrangling. We had 3 times been before the Supreme Court, multiple times before the Court of Appeals in DC. There was a lot of wrangling as Congress tried to take away the right of the detainees to have their day in court. But finally we had our chance to have the trials, and then a pretty stunning thing happened. I can't say it was unpredicted because some of us did predict it. It turned out that once the detainees had an opportunity to hear the charges against them, to present their own evidence, it turned out that they were winning their cases, and judges were deciding that, in fact, the government, even with a terribly low burden, could not prove their cases. The government was not required to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that any of these men had committed some kind of crime or engaged in some kind of act of terrorism. The only burden that the government had was to prove that it was more likely than not that the detainees were associated in some way with either Al-Qaeda or the Taliban. So that was a very low standard. And it turns out that even with that standard, something on the order of 70 to 75% of the detainees were actually winning their habeas cases. And if any of you have heard me speak in the past, you'll know that I actually anticipated this because in the previous conflicts, such as the first Gulf War, when the United States soldiers took into custody persons who were outside of military dress and then gave them the Geneva Convention required status hearings to determine whether those people were actually civilians or enemy combatants. It turns out that our soldiers made errors 74% of the time, and we corrected those immediately. We allowed those innocent civilians to be released. And President Bush never offered any such screening hearings in violation of the Geneva Conventions during the Afghan conflict. So one would expect that at the very least there would be a significant error rate at Guantanamo, and indeed these hearings turned out to substantiate that assumption that we might have had. That said, with depressing regularity, the Court of Appeals in DC started reversing those victories. A very conservative, very reactionary appellate court, federal appellate court in DC started reversing, remanding these victories. And I'll just mention briefly that one of the detainees who won his habeas petition and who had his petition reversed by the Court of Appeals in DC was one of my clients, Adnan Latif. Adnan was one of the men who was, whose words were dramatized in that performance we just saw. He was, as you now know, I don't even need to tell you, he was in Afghanistan to get charitable medical care. He was picked up trying to get to Pakistan while the bombing was happening, as everyone else in the area was. And he was arrested. There were various charges lodged against him during his time at Guantanamo. The charges would come and go. They'd be filed and then withdrawn. It was suggested he was associated in some way with Al-Qaeda. There was no evidence of that. The charge was withdrawn. In the end, the suggestion was that he had spent a week on the front lines with the Taliban, which was a lie. It was untrue. And when we had our habeas hearing, the judge agreed that the single piece of evidence that the government had against my client was a multiple hearsay report riddled with inaccuracies, thoroughly unreliable, and he ordered Adnan to be released. The Court of Appeals reversed that decision. The Supreme Court refused to review that decision, and in short order, Adnan ended his life, somehow able to gather enough psychiatric medication to take it. So all of this leads to the beginning of 2013, because I was at the end of 2012. Very low point in Guantanamo. Adnan's suicide had just happened. We had, at that point, this is about a year ago, we had 170 men still at Guantanamo of the roughly 770 who had been there since January 2002 when it opened. Half of those men had been deemed eligible to be transferred, to be repatriated, to be returned home. They had gone through a multi-agency review task force composed of the Department of Justice, Department of State, Department of Defense, Homeland Security, the FBI, you name the acronym, all unanimously decided that literally half of the detainees were eligible to be returned home, and yet no one was being returned home. No one had been returned home. Basically, the number had been in the single digits for the past 2 years, in part because Congress had put onerous restrictions on the transfer of detainees out to Guantanamo, in part because President Obama had put a moratorium on returning detainees to Yemen after the Christmas Day bombing attempt in 2009, I believe. In fact, in January of 2013, we learned that the special envoy, Dan Fried, the person who was tasked with closing Guantanamo, was being reassigned to another job, which is fine, but the administration conceded that it planned to nominate no one to succeed him. So the envoy to close Guantanamo was not going to be replaced. President Obama did not mention Guantanamo in his State of the Union address, and this led to a palpable sense of despair at the prison. The next thing that happened, these men, by the way, it cost $800,000 per detainee per year to keep these men at Guantanamo. But something happened at that point. The despair grew so great that the detainees really decided to take matters into their own hands. And the key event was the initiation of a new hunger strike. There have been hunger strikes over the years. This hunger strike was engaged in by roughly 160 of the 170 or so men at Guantanamo. It was widespread. We lawyers went down, brought back reports to the newspapers about the hunger strikes. The military denied it, denied the accuracy of our statements, said that there were several, perhaps a dozen hunger strikers. They were lying. They've lied in the past. This is the same military that, under its standard operating procedures, will not discuss suicide attempts. There were only attempts at self-harm or suicidal gestures. By April, the military conceded that almost everyone at Guantanamo was being force-fed. Many was on hunger strike. Many were being force-fed through a nasogastric tube put down their nostril, throat into their stomach, held in restraint chairs. And this, an amazing thing happened at this point, really unprecedented in this gruesome affair. The media paid attention, and the public cared. And I'm not sure exactly why it took this time, but people really focused on what was going on at Guantanamo. And in April, President Obama gave a speech to the National Defense University renewing his pledge to close Guantanamo. In May, Senator Carl Levin called for the president to name a new envoy to the office to close Guantanamo. In June, Clifford Sloan was appointed to be that special envoy. President Obama lifted his self-imposed freeze on transfers to Yemen, and we started to have a glimmer of hope. And I've met with Mr. Sloan, and I believe that he is making good faith efforts to reduce the population at Guantanamo. I think the goal really is to close Guantanamo. I don't know how politically feasible that is, but there has been some movement. For the first time in years, we've had some repatriations. Something on the order of 15 of the men, while Sloan has been in office, have been repatriated. It's not a perfect system. 2 of the men that were repatriated were sent to Algeria, where they did not want to go, where they feared, with good reason, that they would be recruited by terrorists, that they would refuse the overtures, and that there would be reprisals against them for refusing to join with them. In fact, they've been at Guantanamo. They've fought to stay at Guantanamo. They were forcibly repatriated, but the Uyghurs, ethnic Muslim Chinese who were demonstrably innocent, who were declared innocent years ago, they were finally given refuge in Slovakia. So movement was happening, and then finally in December, the new National Defense Authorization Act, the congressional legislation that had put tremendous roadblocks in the way of repatriating the detainees. Many of those roadblocks were lifted. The Democrats managed to actually do something, and that Authorization Act was signed into law by the president. He now has much more freedom to at least start winding down Guantanamo. So I guess I'll leave you, and I hope I didn't go too long, but I'll leave you with this, that for the first time in a long time, I'm feeling somewhat hopeful about Guantanamo. We're moving in the right direction. There are still 155 men there, but more than half of them have been slated for transfer. There are, it's true, there's a substantial number of the men whom the administration has declared are eligible for indefinite detention without any possibility of being prosecuted with a crime, which is itself undoubtedly a violation of the rule of law. But as the population gets smaller and smaller, we can begin to deal more directly with some of these problems. So my message to you is to keep the pressure on. I mean, change only happens because people care and people make their voices heard. So thank you.
I was asked to talk about torture, but I recognize so many faces here, and I recognize that you know what torture is all about. And I had chosen or take a little leap into trying to talk a little more about torture, but what it does to us as a society, to us here, and trying to find ways of connecting and trying to find ways of creating that emergency, because I really feel that we are at a moment where there's a real emergency, and in these next 10, 20 years, we could very easily be at the forefront of deciding what kind of society we will have in our hands for the next 100 years, for the next 100 years. And what is really scared me, I remember once upon a time I was a child, and once upon a time I was an adolescent and an early adult, and I watched TV. I have never saw that much, and still I'm watching TV, and sometimes when I have time, and still what I recognize in TV is how different is TV right now from it was before. You could not, right now you put, from every 10 programs, at least there are 5 that are justifying torture as a tool of everyday existence in our society, and that's really very scary. That's really very scary. I'm afraid that the population is buying that message, and I don't hear the voices. Our voices telling us, no, this is not possible. What kind of society we're going to create? And then I dedicated some time to think about this issue, reread again what the Argentinians and the Chileans, Salvadorians, Father Ignacio Baró, the mothers of Plaza de Mayo, Sintras in Chile, have been writing about this topic and the danger of society. I was just to throw, because there's no a very clear conceptualization before, in my mind, of the nature of the monster and the fear of the consequences if we're not moved quickly to act and to redefine the discourse of that is happening in this country. One of the things that I found useful is a meditation on the development of parallel societies, because it's more obvious at this time to me that we are living in the creation of 2 parallel societies, where there's internal democracy of intent and power among that 1% and maybe 5 or 10% of the accomplices that make this easily happening. And for the rest of us is a phase of friendly fascism. And that's where we are going, to a kind of parallel society when a lot of the population will be subjugated to these fascist policies and sometimes internalized in their everyday life. It seems that that panopticon that Foucault was talking in his book, that vision of power that see everything and is in every place, that definition of all that powerful, tyrannical, patriarchal male God that see everything and control everything is happening through technology. You cannot even fart in this society without the government already knowing that you are farting and the chemical component of your farts. And that's really scary what is happening. And it sounds that it's like science fiction, but how many times people from science fiction are the prophets of this moment? I'm so afraid that they will develop ways of implanting apparatus in each child that is born to even detect people opposing to the government, people opposing to the powers to be. The real God of this moment, the real definition of that powerful being that is in all place, and I will talk about an angry God of the Old Testament rather than a compassionate God of the New Testament, at this moment is the government. And they have the way of controlling this society and really postponing change maybe for 100, 200 years. The philosopher Agnes Seller, in a book, I think that the name of that book is Sociology of Everyday Life, says something that is I feel that it makes a lot of sense to me. That transition between feudalism to capitalism took 300 years to happen and eventually exploded in one moment as a big political act that began to define something new through the Industrial Revolution, yes. But it happened for 300 years where people were living and acting in different ways in pockets of resistance, creating a new way of being. I feel that that's an emergency that we have to respond. How we are going to create these new communities that refuse to participate with oppression 100%, that decide to live differently, not because we have an illusion that because of only with that there will be produce a change, but because we have to create a new culture of resistance, a new culture that goes beyond political acts that keep repeating and that really communicate with the people, from us recognizing how we are the people, and working in the subjective aspect of that change. There's no good theory of how to do that at all, or how to get involved into preventing the ultimate part of torture that is really creating this friendly totalitarian society that will impede any change for the next 100 years very easily. With that, the other side is the increasing, what we will see, and I'm afraid as part of this effort, is a massive increase of the lumpen proletariat, of all that workers that are there that don't have any possibility to be employed in the system and don't have any hope of being part of this system, just totally marginalized, and their only function will be at that moment just to make sure that the people that control the industrial apparatus of repression in this society will enrich their pockets more and more and more. How this is done, I could only tell you from past experience. For example, at that society macro level, that is what I'm talking right now, that society macro level that is so scary, so terrifying, and sometimes so immobilizing. We only see that and we don't do a serious analysis of the possibility of change that this new type of oppression is creating in front of us. In the Argentinian analysis is that there are some kind of cultural patterns that are readily accessible and that people believe that are produced by this type of society. One of them is the inducement to silence, to create a society where people are silent, where people don't participate. We saw that happening on the structural level after the Great Depression, how a lot of families from middle classes, when they saw that they lost at least 20% of their acquisitive value, began to be silent, began not to know what values they're going to be able to foster to their children. A good writer that writes about that is Sennett. He makes a study right here in Chicago of people against the city, or city against the people. I don't remember very well the title. I'm sorry, my mind is not as it used to be before. The other one is the inducement to consider that every political dissidence is in the realm either of mental illness. You know, how can you be opposing to this system that is producing for everybody? And the other is the inducement that it is a very good policy to suffer human rights violation in order to maintain this population protected, this population safe from Al-Qaeda and all these supposedly Muslims monster that is behind us, without any connection of how historically that kind of thing happened. This is what I feel that is happening right now. It's happening in our face. I encourage you to look the media and the public face of media and the public face of entertainment, what kind of culture. You know, you ask people about this issue, and a lot of people will justify torture, and we see and will be very happy to surrender these human rights. I don't know the solution to this problem, but I know that we have a problem right there, and that problem is going to come and bite us, because at the moment that there are those transitions here, we are all going to be the first that are gone, you know, because we are the dangerous people. We are the ones that see what is happening and are willing to do. And my question is, what are we going to do? What are the tasks of this moment? Where are the work that we have to do to identify that this issue of control through torture is to maintain this society of privilege, this social cannibalism, as Roberto Mangabeira Unger in his book Knowledge and Politics says very clear and very convincingly, a society that is organized of everybody fighting for limited resources of power, glory, and money is a society where human interaction at the personal level has to be based in human cannibalistic tendencies. It's more a call to action and a call to reflection, because the challenges that we have in front of us, because of the technological issues, are similar to the ones that the working class experienced in the beginning of the century. In the beginning of the century, when for the first time the bourgeoisie have the capacity of invading the private public sphere of the workers through the radio and through television. They were able to do that. And in that film, 1900, you could see that very clearly, how before radio and television, there were a very rich cultural and societal life of the workers. Nobody wanted to be a millionaire under that moment. Nobody wanted and admiring the places of the rich and the famous. Actually, the workers in Italy during that time, they were looking to the rich as decadent people, as people not to imitate in their moral values. Right now, we have totally the opposite, and we need to do something about it.
I think Antonio is completely correct that we have to understand, we can only understand the continuing imprisonment with no charges, no trials, no justice of the men at Guantanamo, which is itself torture. We can only understand that in a much larger context of what it means for our society and the whole program that it is a part of. I know many people voted for Obama precisely because they thought there was going to be a change of that direction. And instead, it not only has not been reversed, none of those torturers have been prosecuted, but much of that program of the Bush regime has been locked into place and codified. And rather than, as some previous Bush officials, war criminals themselves, have pointed out, rather than imprisoning indefinitely men, mainly for the fact of being Muslims, Obama has taken to drone attacks and assassination of citizens. And the National Defense Authorization Act that he first signed at the end of 2012 actually makes indefinite detention, gives the right of indefinite detention to the U.S. military anywhere in the world, including within the borders of the United States. So we're actually, and all of this is justified as part of the quote-unquote war on terror, and so we're facing what kind of a society are we going to be? Is it going to be a matter of justice and humanity, or is it torture and the protection of American lives above all else? And that we do have something to say, and we have a responsibility to act on that. And with that in mind, I'm going to turn the mic over to Mario Venegas.
Thank you, Jay. It's a very important topic for me to talk about, considering my own experience. Today is the 12th anniversary of indefinite detention for prisoners without being charged or tried at Guantanamo Bay, a concentration camp, as I call it, in Cuban territory. Today is also the 12th anniversary of a concentration camp where all kinds of torture has been applied for the prisoners, including isolation confinement, waterboarding, force feeding to hunger strikers, and other kind of torture techniques. When I talk about this, reminds me right away of my own experience, being detained in concentration camps in Chile during the Pinochet regime, the dictatorship, where we were indefinitely detained with no charges, just for being either at that time communists, today terrorists, or just because we were dangerous for the internal security of the state. Never were charged, we were never tried, we never brought into a court in front of a judge, same as Guantanamo today, 40 years before. Today in Guantanamo, they are enemy combatants, held until the end of the war of terror. And I ask, who defines when this war is going to end? Let me try to point out something important here in terms of what is isolation confinement and waterboarding, which is still being discussed if they are torture techniques or not. Unbelievable. But both the American Psychological Association and Psychiatric Association have not yet agreed in defining this as torture. I suffer them, and I can tell you strongly, yes, both are torture techniques that I suffer for many days in isolation confinement and waterboarding. So it's difficult for me to understand why these associations think that it's not torture yet. Also, force feeding to hunger strikers that we have heard already has been defined as torture by the United Nations, by the World Health Organization, by the World Medical Association. Even the American Medical Association, this country, wrote to Secretary of Defense expressing their opposition to the US military policy of force-feeding detainees in Guantanamo that were on hunger strike. The British Medical Association even has also defined this as torture. These organizations have also been recommending that all doctors and health professionals that have been participating in these force-feeding prisoners at Guantanamo should be tried, should be brought to justice. Today, we have demonstrations that are marking this day and demanding the prison's closure at a rally in front of the White House. But as well, we have participated in demonstrations, there are participants, demonstrations, and events in a good number of cities around in the United States, like in LA, in Miami, and here in Chicago, what we are doing today, and what we did yesterday. And also around the world, including in Europe, in Germany, Italy, England. In London, they have today huge demonstration in Trafalgar Square in front of the US Embassy. And around also in South America and Central America, even in Chile, my town, my country, there was a big demonstration today in front of the US Embassy to protest and to demand closing Guantanamo. What I'm trying to say here is that this is all over the world. It's not just here in the United States where we are concerned about Guantanamo. A big demonstration even in Sana'a, in Yemen, took place in front of US Embassy. Hundreds of people were there risking their own life, protesting for Guantanamo still being open. Last year, these men detained at Guantanamo reminded us the world for their struggle, their plight, through a mass hunger strike that people have been referring to here. And with this act of conscientious pressure, the Obama administration to start releasing prisoners, especially those who have already been cleared to be released even before by the Bush administration. Strong pressure to start transferring prisoners to their country of origin or other countries who will receive them. It was also the time that the people in the US and abroad started more strongly the campaign to shut down Guantanamo. It was the prisoners themselves inside that conditions that create this big movement around the world and here in the US to start taking care of what was going on in Guantanamo and trying to huge this campaign, this big campaign, to make it stronger in terms of closing down Guantanamo. It was that time when our coalition, Chicago coalition to shut down Guantanamo, started our Friday vigils in downtown Chicago, which many of you have been attending. The purpose of this was to denounce the atrocities being committed in that camp, as well as informing, educating the public, calling the attention of passersby there, and distributing flyers with updates of the prisoners' conditions and situation there. It has been a great experience to go through that with people that don't even know what Guantanamo is. The people that stop by don't even knowing that there are prisoners there in Cuban soil. The people that even not know what torture is. People that ask you there, what are you talking about, torturing people? When we all know that this country especially even export torture. When we all know that we have centers here in the United States that are to train in interrogation techniques and torture officers, for instance, from Latin America, the famous or infamous School of the Americas in Georgia, where we train people there. I myself am a survivor of torture, and the main two torturers who tortured me graduated in the School of the Americas when I was in Panama. That's why my commitment to be every year there in Georgia, protesting, condemning, and trying to close down the School of the Americas. Just to update you, and this is most of the information we all in the flyers when we distribute them in our vigils. It's happening since President Obama, for the second time, start talking to close Guantanamo, has gone 231 days since that time. Guantanamo is still open. Only 11 men have been released as of January 3rd, 2014, last week. 155 men remain still in prison. 146 of them haven't been charged. So few of them only has been charged. 75 of them have been cleared to be released, most of whom have been in prison without charge for more than 11 years. An unknown number of men have been on hunger strike for as long as 11 months and are still there, some of them in hunger strike. Most of them were tortured by being force-fed. And this is a violation of the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights. At the most high point of this hunger strike, 106 prisoners were participating. But since December 3rd, the government decided not to give any more information about what's going on there in that camp. Some British journals have been thinking that there are about 35 to 38 hunger strikers still in that camp. And probably they are going to continue force-feeding them, torturing them. 5 years ago, President Barack Obama promised to close the prison. I remember on the second day of his first term when he announced Guantanamo will be closed and no more torture in this country. Guantanamo is still open and torture is still being inflicted on prisoners, not just in Guantanamo, around the nation. People that have been detained. We had the case in the past of Chicago. There's still the police department torturing people in Chicago. We still have in general penitentiary in jail how they torture people there. Isolation confinement is a big issue in this country. And they're still practicing that. So his words at that time were turning to inaction, not acting. Congress raised obstacles to the release of those prisoners, and the President subsequently refused to spend political capital or fully use his existing powers to overcome these obstacles. He can do it with an executive decision to close Guantanamo at any time, but he has not been doing it for different reasons. But Guantanamo still remains open, despite President Obama assured that Guantanamo was going to be closed. Guantanamo has constituted a mock of justice. The base is looking more and more like an internment camp for Yemeni men. Although most Yemenis were cleared for release years ago by the Obama administration, and President Obama lifted his self-imposed ban on transfer to Yemen last spring. No one Yemen man has been sent home since 2010. Yemenis now constitute more than half of the population of Guantanamo. This collective punishment of Yemeni men based on their nationality must end. To make real progress towards closing Guantanamo, the Obama administration must begin releasing Yemeni men without further delay. One of Guantanamo's burning injustice has finally been addressed not long ago with the release to Slovakia of the last 3 Uyghur prisoners. 5 years and 2 months after a US judge ordered their release, they were still kept there. The National Defense Authorization Act for 2014 contains now a few amendments that will help President Obama to release prisoners or transfer prisoners from Guantanamo and pave, according to what we think, the way to eventually close Guantanamo soon. And this was approved by the House of Representatives 2 weeks ago and passed in Senate by 84 votes to 15 just last week. As we wait for more release then, I would like to remind President Obama in his own words last year, Guantanamo is not necessary to keep America safe, were his words. And he added, it is expensive, it's $5 billion a year to keep Guantanamo open. We pay for that. Our taxes are there. It is inefficient. It hurts us in terms of our international standing, said President Obama. It lessens cooperation with our allies on counterterrorism efforts. It is a recruitment tool for extremists. It needs to be closed. Still open. If you haven't already signed a letter to President Obama urging him to close Guantanamo, please do so. There are many websites where you can do it. We have a website for Close Guantanamo Organization, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, National Religious Coalition Against Torture, and ARCAT, World Can Wait, Center for Constitutional Rights, and many others. So there is no excuse that you cannot sign that petition. And if you have signed it, or you haven't signed it, please do it. And if you have, tell your friends and bring them to sign this petition, to put some pressure. The Chicago Coalition to shut down Guantanamo will continue with our Friday's vigil at the corner of Dearborn and Jackson at 4:30 every Friday in downtown Chicago. Even if it is cold, even if it's snowing or raining like last evening, even if it's warm or hot, if we have to still there be for the summer, which I hope we don't, we'll still be there. And we call you to be there with us and bring friends, bring neighbors, bring workers of your company, wherever you work, classmates, student, if you're a student, bring people. Together, we must keep up the pressure to relegate Guantanamo to a dark chapter of this country's past. But even if this concentration camp is closed, we must make sure that no new Guantanamos are built either here in the US or abroad. They might close Guantanamo and open one in Honduras or in any other country where we have military bases there. Even down in Chile, they are opening a military base close to Santiago, the capital. Huge one, huge military complex of US Army. So we have to be watching that no Guantanamo is open or like Guantanamo is open. We must reject indefinite detentions and offshore prisons. One reason President Obama essentially ignored the status of Guantanamo for so long, until the hunger strike of 2013, is because he has directed US policy to focus on killing, not capturing people. Those targeted by the US as opponents are being killed, especially now through the use of drones. They don't need probably concentration camps because they kill them. They don't capture them. Despite that, President Obama's Justice Department has granted immunity to all torturers from the Bush administration, impunity cannot prevail for those responsible for torturing detainees in Guantanamo. They should be all brought to justice and fairly tried for what they have done. And we are responsible that this happen with our campaigns, with our demands, with our protests. Guantanamo remains a symbol of torture committed in the name of the United States every day that it stays open. It validates every negative perception of this country and undermines the rule of law, making that fundamental principle less secure for all who live here. The word Guantanamo has become synonymous with torture, unjust detention, brutality, and inhumane degradation. The U.S. must no longer use the fear of terror to inflict terror on the world. There can be no more excuses. Guantanamo has to be closed, and it will be closed, because only the people, we, will save our people. I don't believe that if we don't put pressure, if we don't mobilize, if the people of the U.S. don't put that pressure, we're ever going to achieve something. That's why it's so important, these coalitions, these organizations, human rights organizations, coalitions against torture, that we all support, and more than support, participate, be active. It's not just looking and talking and having to listen to a talk. You have to go. When you go through that door, you will have to make a decision. We're going to participate. We're going to be mobilizing. We're going to demand Guantanamo has to be closed, because we, the people, are the only ones that are going to save our country, our people. Thank you.
So I think just putting together a few of the points that our speakers have made, it's clear that Guantanamo was never about national security in the sense of defending people in this country. It's, as we now know, in large part due to the Chelsea Manning, the vast majority of the men who were ever held there had committed no act of war, no act of violence. So what was Guantanamo ever about? And I think the letter that Victoria read from at the beginning, a prisoner in California wrote to Revolution newspaper and said that the hunger strikers were giving the world a lesson in what in U.S. torture. Similarly, World Can't Wait, the organization, the resistance movement that I work with, we go to high schools. And we were at a high school a couple years ago on the west side, Orr High School, which is overwhelmingly black. 95% of the students there qualify for free lunch, so it's very poor. And we showed some clips from Taxi to the Dark Side and talked about a taxi driver in Afghanistan who was tortured to death by the US military. It's a very moving film. And afterwards, the teacher asked the students, why do you think the US does this? And one of the, and this is not some magnet school, these were not some honors students. Guy in the back raised his hand and said, lynching. What do you mean? The teacher asked him, what do you mean? And he said, it's just like lynching in the South. It wasn't about killing that one man, it was about terrorizing a whole community. And that's exactly what Guantanamo is today, certainly in the Muslim world. And the world at large. The US is saying we can do whatever we want to do. And that's a symbol that the US is hanging on to. Not without differences of opinion at the highest levels. And we should get into that. And the other side of that, though, is that the people who are on one level, the least power, as all of our speakers have said, are the ones who've actually put this back on the agenda. That's the prisoners themselves. That they have the power to make that kind of a protest that made the world pay attention. And just how important I think that is shown obversely by the fact that the U.S. the administration today refuses to answer direct questions from the media about how many men are on hunger strike, how many men are being force-fed. We only know that through the few prisoners who get through to their lawyers. And we have on the table here a statement released today from Shakir Amr, who is the last resident of the UK imprisoned at Guantanamo, that he released today for this anniversary, and I really urge everyone to get a copy of that. So those are the questions. Why Guantanamo? Why is Obama hanging on to it? And with this small trickle of releases this past 8 months since his most recent promise, and what can and must we do about it? So I open it up to questions from the audience or comments if people want to add, agree, disagree.
Can you get the microphone?
Can you stand up? I'll repeat the question. Yeah, if you can get it to him. Great.
Thank you very much. My first comment is that the strategy put in place by the government is completely wrong. Maybe for us in this room, we believe that maybe while the government wants to scare people, they are just adding terrorists and creating even more and more in Muslim countries. I think the problem is that it creates hate. It creates more the feeling of anger and the feeling of hatred towards in general. So the calculations are completely wrong in this sense. The other problem is that being Muslim myself and being from Morocco, where I grew up and was born and everything, we don't want these people back to our countries. So it's something very complicated because from the one hand, I think that Guantanamo creates more hatred, but from the other hand, we have this feeling that if Moroccan prisoners come back to Morocco, it's gonna be a danger for our country, not because they have done anything, but just because the idea of having people from Guantanamo in Morocco or in Algeria or in Jordan or anywhere else would create something even bigger in those places. I don't know what the solution would be. Maybe just stopping torture in Guantanamo, and first of all, and yeah, but it's pretty complicated for me because I start thinking about these contradictions in my own person, and I don't really know what to do about it.
Respond? Okay, whatever.
You don't have to if you want to. Just flip.
Well, part of the conundrum could perhaps be solved if the United States were willing to accept some of the Guantanamo prisoners into the United States, which in fact Judge Urbina several years ago ordered the Uyghurs back into the United States to at least appear before him in court and presumptively to be released into a Uyghur community in the DC area that was willing to accept these folks. And then we, the United States, might act as a model for other countries, accept part of our responsibility for what we've done and demonstrate that certainly a very large number of the men at Guantanamo are in fact, and by court order have been deemed to be, innocent of any kind of enemy combatancy status, not to mention that they haven't been charged with crimes. So that might go some way towards alleviating that. Realistically, it's not going to happen, but I just want to note that.
There's a person right there.
Yeah, I want to respond to Dr. Marcos, is that right? Martinez's comment about what it's doing to our society. And I'd like to approach it this way, and that is in 2004, I was campaigning for, let's see, who was it there? Was it Kerry? I guess it was Kerry, right, running in 2004. And when I went up, when I was in Wisconsin, people were in absolute shock, still in horror. About the terrorist. And I think we are not going to solve this problem until we address the situation that promoted this climate of terror within the United States. And that is, let's say it's 9/11. And we have to look really seriously, demand a new investigation, because I don't know if there's anyone here, I hope there is no one here, who really believes the official explanation. And along with this has gone a horrendous racist campaign, because it is racist, against the Muslims. And this has promoted in this country a justification, a sense of justification for everything that has happened. And so I just think we have to hold not only the government accountable, but the media. And if you look at the so-called liberal media, even some of our stars, you will see a huge hole here where they have refused to address this issue.
Thanks. So this is the only gathering in the country where I'm the optimist. I'm not sure what you were referring to by the truth of 9/11, but I just want to go on record as saying that to the extent you're suggesting there's some kind of conspiracy that the government was involved in, that's certainly not my position, so I don't want to leave any ambiguity about that, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I take it as more a question of what has been done with 9/11, that we have 12, 13 years later, a so-called war on terror that is a war of terror against countries that had absolutely nothing to do with the demise of those towers in New York. Absolutely nothing. The occupation continues in Afghanistan. It's been 4 million Iraqis displaced, hundreds of thousands of Iraqis dead, a country that, as we know, had nothing to do with the attack on 9/11, just as the men in Guantanamo had absolutely nothing to do with any violent acts against the U.S. I mean, very, very few of them. As Mark explained, even setting the bar so low as having some kind of association with Al-Qaeda or the Taliban, there was no even any evidence or proof of that. So I think the fact that the construct of this war of terror has been used to instill fear, a completely unfounded fear, in the sense of within this country among the American people, or people in this country, to justify this war and this huge agenda of repression that Obama has only continued and codified. I think that is very much something that we have to address, which is not to say that there are not Islamic fundamentalists in the world who represent a very reactionary program, a program that does not actually challenge U.S. imperialism and challenge U.S. exploitation abroad, but that that is like a flea compared to the giant military apparatus that the U.S. disposes all over the world. And we not only should have no illusions ourselves, but that's our responsibility to make that clear to the people in this country, that the greatest damage and danger to the world is actually the U.S. military machine and the empire that it enforces. And 9/11 has served as a very great vehicle to try to reverse that real relationship and pose these relatively small forces, reactionary Islamic forces, as somehow the great danger to peace in the world. So I don't think the argument doesn't rise or fall with what you think I don't think we're going to know who was behind 9/11 probably for decades until all of us are long gone. But I also don't think that the comment raised rises or falls on that. It's really about what has been made of those events by this country.
It's so beautiful, the dialogue, because in the dialogue, yes, a lot of clarification comes from the dialogue, you know. It came to me some realization, you know, or to help me to verbalize what I'm really trying to say with what I said before. In reality, Al-Qaeda is just an excuse for what is happening. This is what I was trying to convey before, that if there was no Al-Qaeda, it would be other people, other group of people that are classified as the dangerous one, the same kind of procedure to stigmatization that is needed to justify torture, to justify political repression. What I was trying to convince the emergency that the dominant classes in this society, in order to maintain their society of privilege, they necessarily have to intensify the level of repression, because there are many, many groups of powerful people in different parts of the world, and they're all competing for shrinking pieces of the pie. The American working class that was the privileged working class in the world is not anymore the privileged working class in the world. It needs to be squeezed more so that the powerful ones will be able to maintain their society of privilege, the parallel society where they have democracy for them, but oppression and dictatorship for us. And that's, I think that is a really very dangerous turnaround because of the emergence of specific technologies that allow the government to be present in every place, almost like a god. And then I'm asking and reflecting in what it needs to be done. And it came to my mind when we through the dialogue that's happening here, the words of Pablo Freire, where he says the political activation, political action is to convince the antagonist to join you against the real enemy. And then I think that we lack of a theory of that convincing, the subjective theory of how we approach people. So in order to create that mass of cultural change that eventually will explode in a political act of defeating our oppressors. I think that that's lacking. And in order to visualize an instrument that was used by Pablo Freire through teaching the peasants and the poor of the world how to read and write, when they finished reading and writing, it was always inevitably in these people that were participating in this circle of alphabetization, the realization, not only I know how to read and write, but I have found and know myself for first time that I am oppressed. that I have been oppressed, that they are oppressing me, and in order to humanize myself, I have to do something about this oppression. And that's the link that I fear that I don't see around. I don't see around. That we go around, but we don't have yet a way of really connecting to the real United States there, to the working class that are there, that is not my enemy, actually is my ally. And that's so painful to see, because these people have a lot of power, and you know it, you feel it, you sense it. And if we don't act quickly, I'm afraid that it will be too late, because they will have so many mechanisms of control to maintain us in this situation for the next 100 years very easily.
I think that the one important point question that was asking about whether accepting people that are coming out of Guantanamo back in their own countries. I probably don't even need this, but anyway. It's, in your way of thinking, let me ask you, the hundreds and some more people that were tortured here in Chicago and were sent to prison by the commander-in-chief at that time, John Birch, and they were released now because they are innocent. They were innocent at that time. Should we accept it here in the society, or should we expel them somewhere else to other countries because we don't need them, we don't trust? And I think in that way of thinking, the people that are coming back probably to your country are people that are innocent, that were targeted, were accused of something they have never committed. Most of the people there in Guantanamo are under those conditions. So in that sense, I wouldn't worry about if they are coming back to your country. The second thing that I would like to stress here is that we're talking about terror and the war against terror that we are not even able sometimes to identify. We talk about countries, and we go to Afghanistan, we go to Iraq, trying to combat terrorists. It's not against the countries, it's about terrorists there. So that's very difficult for people to understand sometimes what are we doing when we invade countries. And I don't buy it when they say, well, we are going to protect democracy there. Democracy like the one we have here? Is that the democracy that we want to export and invade countries and kill people, innocent people, and bring them here to be considered terrorists in detention centers, concentration camps? Because if that's the democracy that we wanted to export and we wanted to have it over the world, I say, no, thank you. This is not the democracy I'm fighting for. This is not the democracy I would like to have. And everything is related to economic points. Economic, you know, if we are going to countries, we are not going because of terror. We're going because of the oil. We're going because something that will profit a number of people, particularly in this country, which we have considered the 1%, not the 99%. And my point is that when that 1% has the power, the political power, the social power, the military power, the economic power, and we don't change that ratio of 1 or 2% against 99, we're never going to achieve some changes. So what we have to do is change that. Try that minority of people doesn't have the power that I said, political, economical, social, and military power. When we change that, then we will be able to say, yeah, we are having a real democracy here in this country, and we can export that democracy. By the time being, no. I don't want to be part of that exporting democracy to other countries.
Okay, we got two, one here and then one in the back.
Thank you. So I just wanted to say a couple of things that questions, and they bear on the work that this coalition is going to do over the next 52 weeks, every week here in Chicago. I think a point that Dr. Martinez made is really important, that as we work to win people over to our side to join this struggle, I think it's going to really be essential to invite them to see the way in which they are being played upon and made to feel fear. And only by liberating them can they come along and be part of this movement. And as we talk about 9/11 and what that has all meant and this so-called war on terror, that is so important. And so I thank you for bringing that up, and I'd like to hear more from the panelists about that. And the other is I want to make a comment about the president that we have and the fact that there have been some releases. The president that we have is an artist of doing just as much as he needs to do and never any more. And so I think of, you know, it's not the baby bear, it's not the papa bear, it's the mama bear treatment, right? He's not going to release nobody, but he's certainly not going to solve the problem. He's going to do just enough so that people say, well, you know, he's trying, he's doing something. And so as I ask myself the question, why is it important to be in the street every Friday? Why is it important to keep the pressure on? It is because he responds to pressure and nothing else. And that's what we need to do. So that's my comment, and I welcome any feedback on that.
This might not reach.
Let's see what it does. Okay. My comment, going back to the comments about Morocco and kind of the whole situation, American people globally, including in the U.S., they exploit them economically. There's story after story about that. They suppress people, they repress people militarily to justify that. They also use ideological justifications. One of the biggest ones is American lives are more important than other lives, and that is not true. American lives are no more important than any other human life. But in the name of protecting Americans, 9/11 ushered in a whole new era of torture and draconian activities, assassination from thousands of miles away through drones, all to protect us, quote unquote. And I think people need to confront that. In the name of, oh, I need to be safe. This is all justified. It is not justified. It is criminal, it is torture, it is murder. The same torture that happens at Guantanamo, there are 80,000 prisoners in the United States who are locked in solitary confinement. By international law, that's torture. And the same ideological justification is used. Those are the worst of the worst. Those are horrendous, those are evil, those are horrendous people. We should never see them again. Nothing is worse than letting you see them or letting them out. And too many people are bamboozled by that argument. And then they accept the framework, and the framework is wrong. The reality is the United States is the biggest oppressor and exploiter in the world. That's where all of this comes from. They have to reinforce their economic exploitation with political systems of repression, and then they create ideological justifications so that people voluntarily go along with it. Thank you.
I was going to raise a couple of points that were addressed before I got to this mic, but the point that the lawyer made about not believing in conspiracies, as a lawyer you should probably recognize that conspiracies are the order of the day in the business of doing business in this country. Without going into details, conspiracies happen all the time. The other aspects are, what is it about the policies of this country that claim they are protecting us by exploiting or demonstrating the ruthlessness of the way they can treat other human beings and co-opt fellow Americans to become torturers and live with themselves at the same time? What are the structural underlying policies of the government and the people the government answers to, which is not us, such that they simultaneously, as expressed, bamboozle people into believing they're being protected on one hand from outside terrorism, while simultaneously we are being poisoned and robbed and dispossessed of our homes by financial terrorists, by chemical terrorists, by an oligarchy of oil industry types who are poisoning people's homes and communities and families. I mean, I'm curious if anybody up there has some understanding of the psychological disconnect or the schizophrenia or the sociopathology that exists within this society, that the fact, as I see it, goes unrecognized or unaddressed.
Hi, my name is and I just wanted to say that when I saw the ad on Facebook, it said something about appreciating Islam in addition to recognizing 12 years of Guantanamo. And from what I understand is that Islam is a religion of peace, and all I can do is look at pictures of the country, because in that country we are considered the enemy. How can we find peace with all these other countries if they consider us the enemy? And I find that as a mother and trying to relate values to my children, the military, all they're doing is dividing us, causing division, and further separating us from these countries. So, I find that a slap in the face. And what I would like to do is find a way to bring people together in this country so that we can stand in solidarity together in peace. But then you mentioned the petitions. I have placed some petitions on my Facebook page as well to close Guantanamo. And the thing is, what I understand about Congress is more than half of the people in Congress are noted millionaires. There was one that I read about makes $598 million a year. Many of them make more than, they make like $200-300 million a year. They do not represent the people in this country. So how are we supposed to sway their opinion? Petitions is a way of opening people's eyes and having them understand the situation, as it did mine. However, I don't think petitions is really enough. Whatever has to be done is maybe lobbying, getting more people interested in this movement that we're creating. And whatever else has to be done, I think we do need to ask and reach out to other people. And my last comment is that we should try to get the waterboarding and the solitary noted as torture, because as I've gone to support many prisoners in the Cook County Jail and recently become very interested in their cases, I noticed that solitary confinement is indeed torture and should be considered torture. And that does it makes people have ramifications in the future of both physical and mental. They can't even relate to people anymore. These are problems that they have for the rest of their lives. And in a way, that should be considered torture. no matter what anybody says. And also the waterboarding should be considered torture. And my question is, what can we do in order to stand in solidarity and support to make sure that the force feeding and the people that were doing the force feeding get prosecuted? Because I don't think it's right that they should walk.
A quick question, like since President Obama retracted his automatic rejection of Yemeni prisoners, has there been any, I mean, it's like there are what, 64 of the 86 cleared for release are from Yemen. So that seems like the huge proportion right there. And to my knowledge, there hasn't been anything since Obama's talk about any solving the really big one, and that's Yemen. Personally, I don't see how we can be drone killing in Yemen because the Al-Qaeda presence bothers us so much, and yet considering release of Yemeni prisoners to a place where some of the releasees might be droned, for all we know. Just a quick there, and then I have an announcement.
Finally, a question I can answer, because I don't have any special insights into the sociopathology of our society. I can comment about Yemen. All of my clients are Yemeni, and the chief reason they're still in Guantanamo is because they're Yemeni. The vast proportion of the prisoners at Guantanamo are Yemeni. So yes, there were no transfers back to Yemen since the self-imposed moratorium, with one exception. One of my clients won his habeas case, Mohammed Hassan, and he was returned to Yemen, where he's living peacefully, but he is the exception that proves the rule. It's true that no one has gone back yet, but the way has been cleared for that to happen. We're hopeful that perhaps Yemen will put together, presumably with American financing, some kind of a rehabilitation program akin to what Saudi Arabia had many years ago now. Many of the returnees from Saudi Arabia went through that program. They had a very low recidivism rate. I put that in quotation marks, scare quotes, because recidivism presumes that someone was engaged in some kind of nefarious action in the past. There were graduates from that Saudi program who went on to become suicide bombers. There is little doubt in my mind that some of the men who will eventually be released from Guantanamo may go on and commit some kind of extremist act. This is the nature of the risk assessment, the nature of the world we live in, and we shouldn't blind ourselves to that. I think that what we're waiting for is some kind of rehabilitation center in Yemen. We've actually been advocating for that for about 10 years, and it may come to fruition. I'm hopeful that there will be a large number of Yemenis returning to Yemen relatively soon. As far as sending them back to a place where Al-Qaeda is active, it's true Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula has been active over the past 5 or 6 years, but counter that with the administration's recognition that most of the Yemeni men at Guantanamo are in fact either innocent of being an enemy combatant or they're not considered dangerous. So returning them to the population should be no more problematic than returning them anywhere else. So I remain optimistic. I truly believe Clifford Sloan wants to reduce the number, and bringing the Yemenis back is a sine qua non. I mean, that's what has to happen.
I have a quick announcement. A photo from Guantanamo shows that part of Guantanamo is rustic. So someone suggested that blood makes it rust there, but this is an abandoned room. Part of Guantanamo.
Yeah. I just want to comment on Lisa's remarks that I couldn't agree with you more that begging Congress to do the right thing is worse than a waste of time. World Can't Wait was founded in 2005 on the premise that politics as usual is not going to reverse the course that this country has taken. The so-called the war of terror and the evisceration of fundamental rights. It has to be the resistance from the people. It has to be, and that which we do not resist, we will learn or be forced to accept. And that has too much been the direction of this country. And that we not only need to speak out on behalf of the hunger strikers, but actually learn from them. That whether the hunger strikers in Guantanamo, the hunger strikers in California, that it is our resistance that is going to change the terms in this country. That in our political work, which, as Mario explained, that we do consistently and constantly in terms of demanding that Guantanamo close, demanding an end to this indefinite torture, and linking that to the whole program that it really epitomizes. And I hope that if people come away with one message, it will be that when we stand up for Guantanamo, we're standing up for or opposing those crimes everywhere, including here in Chicago, Illinois, the whole country, around the world. Mario wanted to make some comments too.
No, just the same line in terms of your question about what we should do to convince people that isolation, confinement, and waterboarding are torture. And I think that we have been sort of attacking every place we can with this. There is a lot of lobbying in Congress, a lot, by different organizations working on this. We do the same here in Chicago. We have been talking to Congress people, to all the people of the Chicago City Council, trying to convince them about this, trying to stop torture. Probably you know that a couple of years ago, we got a resolution of the City of Chicago by unanimous vote that the City of Chicago was declared city free of torture after a big campaign that most of the organizations working here in Chicago, we did. The most important one at that point was Illinois Coalition Against Torture, who was leading this campaign. So we are trying to do as much as possible. But the important thing here, and I was saying before, only people will save the people. I think the resistance that we have to put there, because, and honestly, I don't want to be insolent here, but I hate to be preaching to the choir. And we are doing most of our events normally preaching to the choir because we don't bring people that are not conscientious about our campaigns, bring them over. We have to go to elementary schools. We have to go to high schools, to colleges to talk about this. And we have been doing that. But it's a difficult task, and you know that. It's very difficult because we have against us government, Congress, we have the mass media against us, then it's very difficult. So, but we are persistent, and we are not giving up of this. We continuously work. That's why I was calling the vigil every Friday. We are not giving up of that, as well as many other events, many other organizations are working towards this, doing the work that is very difficult. It's very frustrated sometimes to be working in this subject of human rights because you don't see the results around the corner. Maybe years and years. When we were able to bring to justice people in the Chicago experience was 20-something years later. And even we didn't achieve that because Commander John Birch was only for 5 years sentenced because perjury and not just because he was a torturer. But we did it. We worked on that. And we're continuing going to bring all the other responsible, even former mayor of Chicago, who was responsible at that time too, he will have to be brought to justice. And we have to do consistently, not giving up. And we have to bring more people. That's the way that we are going to achieve it.
I just want to invite everyone. There is a sign-up sheet if you want to be in touch. The Illinois Coalition Against Torture is meeting tomorrow evening. World Can't Wait if you want to become involved in our movement of resistance. We're meeting tomorrow evening as well. A movie is showing Monday. Oh, this is Saturday. Yeah, we're both meeting on Monday. Excuse me, Monday evening. Because, as we said in the World Can't Wait announcement for tonight, this is not over today. The coalition is going to be, and we do not talk to the choir out on those corners. We talk to regular people from Chicago in all walks of life. A movie is showing, Doctors of the Dark Side. It's an amazing expose of the role of the medical profession in administering and developing these means of torture. Has not been shown in months in the city. That's showing on Thursday evening. There's a flyer there at Revolution Books. There are a lot of ways to continue this conversation and continue to brainstorm how we're going to actually mobilize. And I just want to bring up one example. You don't know, or a couple of examples. This is a moving target. As Marc opened this tonight, a year ago, I never would have thought we would have made Guantanamo the issue that it has been this year. Why? Because of the hunger strike. I'm very proud of the fact that World Can't Wait really took that on. We were able to raise $50,000 to print a full-page ad in the New York Times in Obama's face on May 23rd, the day he made that statement. Not coincidentally, which was signed by some of the greatest writers of this generation, Junot Diaz, Dave Eggers, Noam Chomsky, Daniel Ellsberg, some of the lots of lawyers, lots of Guantanamo defense lawyers, where opportunities arise to make an impact in public opinion that we have to be prepared and actually seize upon. Similarly, a lot of people here probably knows who Mos Def is, a big rap star. Now he converted to Islam. He did a video, The Guardian, of being forced fed that has gotten millions of views on YouTube. And when we talk to young black Chicagoans, that's how they know about Guantanamo. What that one man did and posted it on YouTube has changed perceptions and understanding of what this country is about. And speaking to Dale's question about the social pathology, that is such a huge educational tool, as the hunger strike itself is. And we have to grab on those and use those tools, put those to work. That's what this movement to shut down Guantanamo is about. That's what the Illinois Coalition Against Torture and World Can't Wait, that's what we're about, and that's what we really invite all of you to participate in.
Question/comment, and there's a lot of rich threads in this discussion, and we got somewhat of a taste of what is the actual experience for these men in Guantanamo, some of them in extreme isolation, some of them on this hunger strike. Marc's book that he edited, Poems from Guantanamo, people should read. It gives you a very visceral and artistic take on those men's experience. I wonder perhaps if you could talk about maybe that you've heard from clients or other people more about the experience, and Mario may as well, and just to throw out there, look, Now, I have not been in Guantanamo. I spent many years in solitary confinement. In fact, within the last several months, I spent 2 months on hunger strike in Cook County Jail in solidarity mainly with the California prison hunger strike, but the Guantanamo prisoners were very much in my mind as well. I've been in a jail strapped to a bed, shackled to a hospital bunk with a IV inserted into me, which is not the same level of torture that the video that Mos Def participated in shows that these gentlemen face every day in Guantanamo. But there was also this thread that I just wanted to connect as well there, that the kind of connection between the U.S. system of incarceration and solitary confinement in particular and the spread of the conditions of imprisonment and solitary confinement in particular. There's an article by Atul Gawande in the New Yorker that was called Hellholes, and it very much connects the use of solitary confinement in American prisons, Supermax in particular, and how that torture next door paved the way for the country to allow this pervasive system of torture against the global other in Guantanamo. I would really highly, people should read it. And if people could speak more a little bit to the actual conditions that these men are still facing, I would appreciate that, and thank you for speaking.
Thanks. Well, yeah, it's as you describe it. It's horrific, and the chief problem at Guantanamo now is the solitary confinement. Aside from the fact that continuous, indefinite detention for more than a decade is going to drive anyone mad. Some of them are being subjected to long-term solitary confinement. My client Adnan was one of those guys, and that's partially what drove him around the bend and resulted in his suicide. Much more so during the Bush administration, there was, as everyone knows, a lot of abuse at Guantanamo, sometimes amounting to torture very clearly. If anyone, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but if anyone has any doubt about that, Time magazine, way back in maybe it was 2006, published the classified interrogation logs of detainee 063, who turned out to be Muhammad al-Qahtani, and it's a 10-minute by 10-minute account over the course of about 7 weeks of the kind of abuse that he was subjected to, and anyone can tell that is torture. But my clients would routinely be disciplined for the smallest infractions. Just as one quick example, I once went to visit Adnan and met him in the interview cell, and he was, when I saw him, he was just covered, he was black and blue, covered in bruises. He was sore all over, and I asked him what had happened. He had been IRFed, is the term that they use. An immediate reaction force had come into a cell and extracted him. So 6 men in Hercules uniforms and batons and shields just beating the crap out of him. And his infraction then was that he had not stepped, as he was supposed to, stepped behind a line painted in the middle of his cell when his lunch was being delivered. So yeah, he had refused to cross the line, and that's why they beat him up. So that kind of thing, and then you have more subtle things in the early days of Guantanamo. Punishment for disciplinary infractions included things like having your trousers, your long trousers, removed and being forced to spend the day in shorts, which I know will not sound like torture or abuse of any kind to many of us, but these men are all, to a man, devout Muslims in Guantanamo, and they were praying regularly during the day, and they felt that they were immodestly dressed. And of course, this only makes sense as a punishment if it was intended to inflict some kind of religious humiliation on the men. So these things were decidedly worse in the early days and during the Bush administration. Guantanamo was much more in line with what the Geneva Conventions require today. Of course, the chief problem is certainly solitary confinement, is forced feeding, which, as the other panelists have mentioned, is clearly a violation of medical ethics and the WMA and all kinds of organizations. But then obviously the indefinite detention is the chief problem.
I would urge people to pick up a copy of now I'm blanking out on his name, Shakir Amar's statement today, which describes some of the inhumane conditions under which he is imprisoned in Guantanamo. And I would also add the punishment of the men who were hunger striking was to deny them the right to collective prayer. And that was part of why the hunger strike numbers went down, because during, I'm blanking out, during their religious Ramadan, they had to choose between accepting the humiliation of their imprisonment and coming off hunger strike, or being able to pray. These punishments really are, as you alluded, designed to humiliate them, to punish them for their religious practice. And I think Adnan Latif's poem, "These Are the Artists of Torture," is apt, is not a metaphor, is very real. And I think that many of those forms continue or have new developments under this administration. So I think that's it. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you for your participation and your interest, and we hope to see you out in the streets building a movement to shut down Guantanamo.